as police were shooting tear gas, they were also shooting with pictures.
It was a competition.
It was a competition of shots. Plus journalists were also now shooting the stories. The consequences of being in that environment for such a long time, I could still feel it in my head. I could feel blasts, talk of imaginary blasts.
Yeah.
And my clothes were still smelling of tear gas, even as I got home. You can imagine the amount of that gas that we had breathed that day. The Finance Bill 2024 protests.
Today we're bringing you a story of a journalist and his experience right in the middle of the protests.
And I tell you, Yvonne, it's a day I will never forget.
My brother, you have made history.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, for having me.
You're so welcome.
This is a nice place.
Tell me how how that experience was. Before the chaos even erupted in the country, the whole process, what was going through your mind as you watched the country and the heat going up every minute, even with the government going back and forth with the public?
We are talking, the climax was 25th June. That is the last Tuesday, or we can basically say the last week of June 2024. The country made history, or history was made in Kenya.
Yeah.
The climax, or the highlight of the day, was invasion of parliament.
Yeah.
But there were events that led to that. Basically, everybody, or most of the people, know how we got there. So this is my experience on that particular day. We woke up very well. We had planned that we're going to cover the demonstrations or protests. And we planned how we're going to go live, the interviews we're going to do. Basically, what happens in a newsroom.
Yeah, of course.
To just plan for the day. But we were not ready for that experience.
Had you put any security measures maybe to ensure that your safety was guaranteed, even as you planned to cover this and bring the information to the public?
For a start, we had planned to at least have masks to protect, because we knew we'll encounter tear gas and all that. But we also had information that we need to be on the side of the police, because that, they are protecting, or rather they are the face of security.
Yeah.
So at least you may not be robbed when you are with them. And at least they have gear like shields. So if they were to throw stones and all that, we had some very heavy clothing as well. So that if you stumbled, you would not get hurt as much, because we were going for what we call running battles. But when we got to town at around 9 a.m., even before we could disembark from the vehicle, there was already a man on top of a police truck with a placard. And now crowd started gathering. There were like 2 people, 3 people. So when this guy was there atop the police truck, can you imagine he managed to jump and escape, because he was to be arrested, but he escaped. Within 30 minutes, the street now became chaotic. Tear gas canisters started being lobbed at the people who were now shouting. They were dispersed. But again, they regrouped. So from Kimathi Street, you would hear other streets people shouting. So they started coming together. The crowd started growing. We went around towards archives, National Archives. That is where we found a bigger group that was shouting.
Now, from your observation, are these groups divided into maybe the Gen Zs and the older group? It was just a collective group with one basic agenda?
It was a mixture, because some of them would tell us, we are not Gen Zs, we are millennials, we are here to support Gen Zs, because this bill, if it passes, it will affect everybody. And we are here to represent even our parents, because they have not been able to do what Gen Z have done. So we are here in support of Gen Zs. We must do this. We are determined. Because there was, let me call it a barrier of police officers. And these were not ordinary police officers. They were anti-riot police officers. They had full gear. I don't know whether to call it combat, but because combat is in the battlefield. But this one was anti-riot gear with batons. Some had guns, shields, helmets, protective gear of the knees and elbows. I remember one person asking me, why do they look like robots?
In the battlefield that morning.
That particular morning.
Yeah.
And I think it just began with now tear gas. Initially, it was like fun, a game of cat and mouse. They are pushed from one street, they go to the other. Every street had police officers. So they kept throwing the protesters from one street to the other for about 1 hour. People were coming from every street now gathering around Nation Center and now towards Kenyatta Avenue, where one barricade of police officers were. And that road was leading to City Hall.
Right.
Kenyatta Avenue, then is a way that, towards City Hall. And you know what that road leads to? It leads to the Supreme Court, City Hall, and now Parliament.
Parliament on the other side.
Yes. That was the route they were taking, but now police had stood guard. Let me tell you, for about 4 hours, the air had changed. I don't think we were breathing oxygen. It was just tear gas. Now, remember the theme is rage and courage. These people would pick the tear gas canisters. You see, police, they were either shooting tear gas canisters at the protesters or throwing them. Because the crowd would charge towards the vehicles of the police, and there were lorries, and those lorries were filled with tear gas. There were like, I think 3 lorries and a small pickup. They were filled with tear gas. They threw those tear gas, they threw them until they couldn't, I think they depleted, but they were left with some behind, maybe for protection or any other eventuality. But the sea of people that were on that street was so big. At some point, when the police now retreated, I could see them doing this sign. You see, time out.
This is now the police doing that.
Please, pleading with the protesters, please. We are now. We don't have any other. We don't have more tear gas to throw at you.
To like control this.
Yes, now, please, and don't harm us. What was interesting, after the police retreated, the crowd became bigger, but now they surrounded the police and stopped.
Wow.
So it was like, okay, so this confrontation is what was bringing chaos.
So in your opinion, this was not a violent protest at all?
It wasn't. In the beginning, it wasn't.
Yeah.
In the street that I was. And at this point, I should mention that we ducked into Art Cafe, Kenyatta Avenue, and they were very gracious. They gave us water to drink, free of charge. And of course, they have washrooms, so we could at least wash our faces because, there was, if you were in town on that particular day and you did not smell tear gas, you were not in town. Every street. What I also noticed is that, you see, Art Cafe gave us water. And we were not just ourselves. There was another team of journalists that was also there. So they shielded us because we had also to take some retreat because the chaos were too much out there between the police and the protesters. But at some point, the confrontation ended. And when they came towards the police, they started taking selfies. They started...
With the police?
The police. You see, this is a different generation of protesters. You have tear gassers.
You've run out of
tear gas. Here we are, and we are harmless. We are not going to harm you.
We're actually not against you.
We are not against you. In fact, one of the placards I remember was written that don't throw stones at the police. they are also hungry or they also pay tax.
They're also affected by this same issues
by this
we're fighting
bill.
against. Yeah.
These people, they were so friendly. Now, in fact, I saw police officers giving protesters water from their gear, because some of them had, I think in their package, they have a reservoir for water. They were giving them. It was, that was a beautiful moment.
Of course.
But again, from that street, there was no violence, except at some point, there's a vehicle that came in. I think it was a bus or a lorry. It had protesters. I don't know where they had come, but they were able to get into the CBD. But they were followed by a water cannon. Apparently, this water cannon had been disabled by another group of protesters.
Oh my goodness.
This generation of protesters is just different. They were fearless. They were resilient. They were bold. So what would happen is that the group that was at City Hall, they would get tear gassed. This other group that is at either Kenyatta Avenue, they would respond. Because I think the entire day, there were blasts all over. You could hear blasts on this other street, everywhere. And those were tear gas canisters. And some were very lethal. Some were so painful. I mean, so powerful.
Yeah.
At some point, we almost ran out of breath. That is why we were able to, we ducked into Art Cafe to at least catch some breath. These guys would pick the canisters and throw it back to the police. Remember, we are around the police for protection as well. But again, these protesters were not attacking the journalists or the police. They just wanted to be allowed to protest.
Yeah.
At around midday, internet became a bit slow around where we were. So we started looking for another place to be able to stream. But now around the city, it became too slow. I think we abandoned that mission and now decided to focus on the placards and the people, just to walk around the streets and see. And they were seeing everywhere. Anti-tax bill and president chants were all over. That particular day, I could see people donating their services and goods to protesters. People gave out food, they gave out water, they gave out shelter. There are some that gave, actually, I understand placards were given. Those are services that were donated towards the protests because everyone wanted to be part of it. Then came the moment that Parliament was in session. I think it was around 2 p.m. or thereabout. Because in the morning, they had sat to discuss the bill. So it came to voting. So when they passed the bill, that is when hell broke loose. And they decided, now we must get into Parliament. So everyone, wherever they were, they overran the police. And I remember our boss calling us, telling us now it is getting too intense. How safe are you? And we told her that we are trying to snake our way out of the city. And every street that we turned to get out of the city, there was a sea of people. I have never seen so many people, Yvonne, like that day. Like you stand on a street, behind you is a sea of people, ahead of you is a sea of people, not a street, on a roundabout. The 4 roads that are on a roundabout. Every road, every street, a sea of people. In fact, 2 protesters volunteered to help us get way through the crowd. And we took pictures as we were moving because, you know, this generation of protesters is photomaniac. So once they see that you have a camera, they want to shine. So they would come with all manner of placards for us to take pictures as we snaked our way out of the city. Unfortunately, these protesters were able to disable one of the cannons, water cannons. And so now that it couldn't be used anymore. And then they would take pictures on those police vehicles. I have never seen something like that. They would hang on the trucks, take pictures, take videos, whether police officers are there or not. Their job that day was to be on the streets and take as many pictures as possible. So as police were shooting tear gas, they were also shooting with pictures.
It was a competition.
It was a competition of shots. Plus journalists were also now shooting the stories. But remember, I told you that people donated their services. I remember, including some of us in the industry, journalists, confronting police officers why they are shooting they are shooting at the protesters. Like Larry Madowo. The other day there was Ibrahim Karanja of NTV. They had this invention which had not been seen before in the previous protests. They had toothpaste around their eyes, apparently to dissolve the effects of tear gas, crying. And some would walk in twos, they would hold hands so that, because it was, if you lose your partner, you are not going to see them anymore.
Why do you think it goes to this point where people have decided we are done talking about this online, we want to go to the streets, we want to pass a message, albeit peacefully? What do you think pushed them to take these measures?
I think the leaders that were elected, because have not been listening to people. This bill has been out there. There was public participation, and people gave out their recommendations. And they felt that their recommendations had not been included in the report. And there was also, to be honest, it's objective and it's out there. There was also some chest thumping from some of the representatives. So people felt angered, and they decided, now let's pass our message that we don't want this bill. We pass our condolences to the people who lost their lives on that particular day.
Then came the announcement that finally we have listened to the people and we will heed to their, demands. How was that received by the public, from your opinion? Because you have covered this whole protest and the whole debacle from the very beginning to the point where today we have seen people become a bit calm after the announcement. What was your experience with this whole response from the government after the heated protest?
That night, after the parliament buildings were stormed by some Kenyans, there was a speech, there was a press briefing or a national address by the president. And again, online, the protesters did not receive it very well, because it's like their message, they felt like our message has not gotten home. We still don't want this bill. But then one day later, the president says, I agree with you. So he used the words that the protesters were, we can say that he rejected it as well.
Yeah, I concede.
Yes, he conceded and said, okay, you don't want it. And then he outlined the repercussions or the consequences of not having that bill, because it was meant to raise some additional funds.
Of course, to fund some of the projects he had outlined here.
So now people felt like, finally, you have listened to what we have been saying. They kept asking, why did we have to lose some people while we have elected leaders who should be representing our message, who should be representing our ideals. We participated in public forums. We gave out our recommendations. Why were they not picked? But I would say that before the bill was voted, there were clauses that have been changed, but the momentum had already gathered. We don't want the entire bill. Now, here we are. It's now everybody's looking at Kenya with a different eye. Like, we did not know that you can do that.
Getting all these challenges that were facing the journalists, the risks that were involved, the tear gas that you had to endure to just bring this information, how would you say this has changed you as a person, especially that you've become part of the history in reporting one of the milestone events in the country?
I think, number one, the experience of being in that event itself is defining, because you are between people who are protesting, they are chanting. Can we say that you are eating tear gas together? But you also have a story to write.
Yeah.
You also have a story to document. And you have to be there. In as much as sometimes you say, your life is not worth the story. But you have to be part of writing that history. And I felt, number one, I felt honored that I was covering. I experienced what other journalists also experience. It is not easy. It is very tough. But at the end of the day, did you get the story? Yes, we did. We documented that, because journalism is about writing history.
Yes.
We draft the history first, then it is recorded. I was happy to be in that event to document what was happening. The consequences of being in that environment for such a long time, I could still feel it in my head. I could feel blasts, talk of imaginary blasts.
Yeah.
And my clothes were still smelling of tear gas, even as I got home. You can imagine the amount of that gas that we had breathed that day. I think it is a defining moment for public participation to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Yes.
Going from there, we are glad to have brought you this information right from the middle of the chaotic experience that was, and that has been King'ori Wangeshi. Today I got the honor of hosting him to understand what went through as he went on to collect, gather, interview people, experience the chaotic experiences, and bring us such fascinating information from the ground. King'ori Wangeshi, it's such an honor to see how passionate you are with storytelling, news gathering. Your journalistic standards are impeccable. Wow. And I'm glad to have been working with you all this time.
Thank you very much. Maybe I would ask them, what was their experience as well? If they were protesting, because the protests were across the country. Wherever you were there protests? What was your experience? They can just. And
did you participate? What was some of the things that you experienced as you participated in whatever county you were participating from?
Yes.
Talk to us through the comment section, and let's hear your experience and what you think about this milestone, that we have achieved as a country, and what that means for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, King'ori.
Bye-bye. See you.